Updates and information sharing legislative session update from Justin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff. Good to see everybody. Happy Friday. Just a quick general session update. As I've said to people before, each legislative session takes on its own feel, has a different feel from session to session. And, in the past 6 years I've been doing this, this one is really different. And I think it's different for obvious reasons. We're coming out of a pandemic. We've got a ton of new members and a ton of new staff. So what I've been seeing a lot, and it's not just with Salem as a client, but some of my other clients, I've been seeing a lot of activity that's outside the norm. That's directly emailing the mayor. That's directly emailing a tribal chairwoman. That's directly doing a lot of things that aren't standard practice. So when you guys get stuff coming across your desk, just make sure to let us know or at least share that. So when I'm in the building, I can make sure to have those conversations and follow up on that. Also, it's really important to understand everybody's got their own agenda. That is not our agenda. And we know how that works, and that makes for some difficult conversations, especially with our own delegation and our own friends. So just be aware that that kind of stuff is going on early in the legislative session. I'll be able to make up some time here, Mr. Mayor, because there's not a lot going on other than a ton of policy stuff, right? But I want to keep our eyes on the prize. So I've got upcoming meetings with Speaker Rayfield, with Co-Chair Sanchez, and then obviously I'll be sharing all the stuff with the delegation. Those are follow-up meetings to make sure the conversations that we've already had, we're already on Rayfield's master spreadsheet with our priority focuses, which are on page 2 of everybody's agenda. So we'll be doing that. I know that Sarah and Kristen asked me to talk to some of the folks at the Rail Users League. I'm doing that as well. I will talk to Kevin Campbell, if you haven't, Kevin, already, just to get a general sense of what's going on. And then Tom Holt, who's kind of heading up the recreational vehicle stuff, RE, some of the homeless issues. So those are coming up in the next couple of weeks. Real quick timeline. This last 2 weeks in March, once we see another deadline, we've got a deadline, I think it's March 17th, for bills to have work sessions scheduled. Once we see that, I consider that kind of a policy period, right? So that last 2 weeks of March and the first 2 weeks of April are really opportunities for us to either insert ourselves if we've got problems with bills that made it through that first deadline, or to be a little strategic on how we want to message those bills going forward. So that's an important month there, the last 2 weeks of March and the first 2 weeks in April. And then, as everybody knows, once we've got another bill deadline then in April. And then once we get that May forecast, then it's really on. And I think, again, where we really excelled in the last 3 legislative cycles is focusing on those funding requests and getting those things done. And I still see those as our big priority. So those are the timelines I've got. That's the quick little general legislative session update. Ready to move on from there since we got all our staff and can get into the weeds on some of these bills.
Thank you. Unless there are any questions for members for investment. All right, Courtney.
Thank you. So we have some broad topics again on your agenda, things where we wanted, because of some of the things that Justin just pointed out, we wanted to draw your attention to a couple of bills. But please notice that we're not recommending a position that's still early, and there's a lot of things in some of these, some that are good, some that might be more prickly to us. And so we want to just introduce in general a bunch of activity that you might be hearing about. These are sort of higher profile things that get some attention and attraction. So on the housing related bills, I asked Jessica to address House Bill. We made that mistake before. House Bill 2001 on housing and House Bill 5019. Jessica?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'll speak lately. It's just the housing administrator for Salem Housing Authority. House Bill 2001. It's interesting, kind of speaking to Justin's point. Many of the housing bills started out with one paragraph saying study housing, and then as things came out, they packaged them all up. And this is our first view at directly addressing the homelessness executive order. And so we have House Bill 2001, which is the policy package. It came out really fast, 11 amendments, very big, kind of mixed together. One of the big things we were tracking as a city was ONA, which is the housing needs analysis. And it used to be House Bill 2889. We were just watching it. That's where the state essentially says what our plan is to build housing, where, when, how, and so we're tracking that. The big thing to note is that House Bill 5019 is the funding package that goes hand in hand with the policy package of House Bill 2001. One of the direct impacts for the city is the 130 million that will be allocated to address homelessness across the state of those counties that were declared emergency, and we are one of them. So conversations are happening now more along the lines of what does that mean and what do we need to do? So those are things worth keeping our eye on. Very close.
I can add a little bit to that, just in terms of on the ground of that planning process, but we have a MAC group, which is a multi-agency coordinating group. They made the decision yesterday or the day before that that money will be coming through the continuums of care, of which we have a Marion Polk continuum of care. I'm the vice chair of it. Commissioner Gordon is the chair. And so that's really good news for us. We had been advocating for that. We were concerned about getting into other areas that may be more difficult to get that. We have a very short timeline to get this money out. I don't have the number in front of me, but I think our Marion Polk region is somewhere between 12 and $14 million that we'll be getting that we have to spend by January. And we have certain targets in terms of number of new shelter beds, number of rapid rehousing, and number in for prevention. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I took the Zoom meeting at home yesterday and those notes are sitting on my desk at home. But in terms of our targets, they are reasonable targets. They're not, but we have to hit the ground running. I mean, you can't like start up a new program and think you're going to hit these targets. We have to really invest in things that we know work. And we have providers. So far, we have proposals from Center for Hope and Safety, Community Action, and Church of the Park. There are three very solid proposals, and I think there's a variety of options that we have within those to come up with some services, and I'm sure there will be more.
What about the housing authority?
The Housing Authority does not have a request in at this time.
Could we
Yes,
expand the navigation component?
we certainly could. I asked specifically yesterday, we met with the consultants and the folks from the state whether. So the question was, these have to be for new beds. So my question was, what does new mean? And I specifically talked about both navigation center, and then DJ followed up with micro shelters. So we have and I described the navigation center as it's in process. It's not open yet, but it will open with or without this money, but we have a limited amount of time we'll be able to operate it for. Would those beds be considered new? And the answer was, if they're not in our current bed count as of right now, when this money comes out, yes. And so the collective interpretation was, yes, we would qualify with the navigation center. So the real challenge with this thing is, so we have to decide by this afternoon. So we got all this information yesterday. We have to decide by this afternoon who the fiscal agent is going to be. I think it's going to be Polk County. That seems to be a good place. I offered us as a potential, but I didn't push for it. I just offered it as a resource if we needed it. It looks like the group is comfortable with Polk, which I think is a great place. The next thing is that our plan is due on the 10th, which is 7 days from today. And so everything is moving at a speeds I've never seen before. So we have 1 week to develop our plan, or to tell them how we're going to deliver on these goals, and then we'll be able to fill in the blanks on the plan as we go on. So that's the basics on what I know on that.
Wow. So given all of that context and the speed, is there an interest on the part of this committee to take any position on either bill?
Well, we absolutely need to support both of them 100%.
I agree with that.
Great.
And specifically for the ability to use it for things like the navigation center.
Well, that's already baked in. Yeah, we're good.
So then what we would do is prepare a report for council with the recommendation from this committee to support House Bill 2001 and House Bill 5019. And so that would go to council. I forget even what day it is, 13.
We need that to go to council since it's already basically included in our largest priorities?
It is in our larger priorities. Sometimes the council as a whole prefers that we have recommendations that tie our support to a specific bill reference. But it's,
I mean, it's fine.
we can
but
support it in our current legislative statements. So we can prepare letters of testimony if there are any upcoming hearings. I can't remember on these
I don't
two.
know if the hearing for 2001 happened this week. So, but we have 48 hours. I'll have to check and see if it's still within the 48 hours. I'm not certain. But I'm sure there will be continued opportunity as they haven't.
Yeah, they're still talking.
There's,
Yeah.
yes.
So we can just belt and suspenders, put something on the agenda for the council meeting on the 13th and proceed with the references to the existing policy statements until that point.
I think that makes sense to me. I mean, it's always helpful. I'm happy to be on legislative committee right now, but in the past, I was always curious to know what bills were supporting the legislature, and the constituents like to know which bills we're following. A lot of times we as counselors get asked what's going on in the legislature that impacts the city of Salem. So it's a great way for us to be on the same page, share the talking points that we're already crafting here. So I'm very supportive of adding it. I know we typically add it to our consent agenda in any case anyway.
Anything else on those two?
Did you say 12 to 14 million of the 130 would go to Marion Polk, and it's going to go through our continuum of care? And then that's where these proposals from community actions, and road safety and church park are all coming from.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I was understanding.
Yep. You got it.
Wow, okay, that's exciting, but yeah, my goodness, those deadlines are rolling.
Yeah.
And Salem Housing Authority we have a meeting scheduled today to come up with our proposal.
Nicole was in that meeting, Nicole and.
That's what I was-
we're in
That's
the
what I was
meeting.
asking about.
So, yeah.
Great.
We were having, sorry. Sure, we had a whole conversation during the meeting about it, so yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you for all your swift work on that.
Anything
So,
else?
Mr. Mayor, just to get it on the table, we're supportive of that package overall in general. There's a hearing, I think, on the 7th.
Yeah.
And there are amendments being rolled into it
It's.
of some things that we don't like, but again, well, let's just make sure being supportive of the overall package is it viable?
Yes.
Thank you.
Did you, Justin, are those hearings for 5019?
I think it's 2001. I mean,
It's 501.
5019.
on the 7th.
And can you tell us briefly what are the amendments that are coming down the pike that we're not supportive of?
Well, I was talking about 2001 with Jessica, and I think there were some issues around 2889, which got rolled into some -11s.
Yeah, so the 2889 rolled into the -11s, and they're essentially a removal of some of the local control surrounding the housing needs analysis. So that was the one we were initially watching as things were coming out fast and furious, but overall it was the state dictating what our housing needs were for the city of Salem, and brought in some of Eunice gave us some insight as far as what that looked like from a planning and land use perspective. So it does adopt a lot of changes that the city would have to accommodate. And so those came in at the very last second. The first 60 pages of the -11 amendment was the roll-in of the housing needs analysis, which is what we were watching.
And then they're both being heard at 3.7. It's down in the transportation sub, so 2001 and 59.
Transportation.
I'm seeing it went from it's assigned down in transportation economic development on the 1st.
Okay.
All right, so they can both be heard down there.
Thank you. Anything else on that from those two?
So we'll prepare letters of support for your signature, and we're going to assume support one is the position, and we'll get that on the calendar. Excellent.
Awesome, thank you. Jessica.
That was a really good update. So we're gonna completely pivot and talk about human resource related bills for a minute. There are two, and again, these are things where we just want to illustrate the complexity of the bills, and we're not asking for any position unless you wish to take one. It's House Bill 3165 and Senate Bill 907. Is that a 9 or? Excellent.
Yeah, so.
Perfect. Would you mind, Kirsten, just walking us through?
So, House Bill 3165, there's actually kind of a sister bill to it, which is 2481. Both of which would potentially put in some of our emergency services personnel into collective bargaining agreements. With 3165, it's specifically related to police. With 2481, it's specifically related to 911. Historically, ERB took a look at what are the functionality of those positions, and can they recall people back to work? Can they assign overtime? Can they give time off? Can they functionally schedule? Can they make allotments and pivot workloads, workflows, provide corrective action? And it didn't have to raise to the level of economic sanctions to be considered a supervisory position. Both of these bills would take all of the rest of those assignments out of consideration for what would be a supervisory position. In terms of potential impacts, if we start chipping away at what is the definition of supervisor so that you can only do, economic sanctions to be considered a supervisor, a lot of our first line supervisors actually don't do that. So that could be something that could be, spread more widely into our general first line supervisors. Our overarching philosophy would say that we would not be supportive of these two bills because they would directly impact how we do city operations with regard to personnel management. And that brings us to 907, which honestly, from my perspective, is a nightmare.
Before we go past 3165, it sounds like that bill might not be a problem for us. I don't know that it's going to go anywhere.
No, it's a strange mix of sponsorship and it's just been sitting around. So we'll keep an eye on the deadline, I think, if we do anything.
Can we add 2481 to kind of like the same level of watch since
Yeah.
they're really somewhat.
Yeah, and I did. Thank you for bringing that up. So we'll get that on the tracking.
Okay, perfect.
And what was the next one?
907, Senate Bill 907.
What's about that?
So this is really, really interesting to me. And I am told that it's kind of in response to some of the inclement, ridiculously hot weather we had summer before last, where it was 119 degrees in the valley. And it's to protect, agricultural and farm workers from some of the conditions that were being exhibited. As the bill is written, it doesn't say that. It has employer used in the biggest sense of the word, and employee used in the biggest sense of the word. There are no carve-outs for anything within the collective bargaining agreement. There are no carve-outs for anybody that's an essential personnel or a first responder. It basically permits staff that self-assess a situation to determine that they feel unsafe to be able to say, hey, I don't feel safe about that work assignment, I'm going home. There's no remediation in the way that the bill is written in terms of what staff, supervisory staff could do to, take a look at whatever the issue is, to redirect that work. There's no remediation in terms of looking at OSHA or any of the other kind of safety agencies as to whether or not the work is actually dangerous or not. Just me as a staff member saying, hey, I have concerns, I can then go home. Also problematic within the bill is once I decide that I'm leaving my workstation, I can use Paid Leave Oregon to augment hours I may have missed. So that essentially turns Paid Leave Oregon into a PTO account and not actually just a sick leave account. As an HR administrative thing, this one is an absolute nightmare. It's making my cohorts all kind of like, oh my golly.
Any word from the league or anybody else that's up in arms about it?
Yeah, all the HR peoples are all like, golly, no. I don't know how much grassroots like there is from ORPELRA, which is the Oregon Public Employers Labor Relations Association. So they're talking about doing basically a letter of like on it just because of the administrative nightmare that it would be, and the fact that there are no carve-outs for anybody that has collective bargaining agreements or mandated first responders.
Okay.
Are there any amendments coming? Do we know?
No, there's been no action since they went down there on the 15th, got referred down to labor and business. And what was the House Bill 3165? It is.
Just a bunch of.
Yeah, they're both keeping around. We'll keep an eye on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Justin, if you could check in maybe on these and figure out if there's, maybe we can offer some amendment ideas for amendments.
Yeah, if it's gonna go on, so let's just wait and see.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
Mostly, we're bringing these bills to you because they could get high profile attention. We just wanted you to have awareness
Sure.
about some of the implications. So
And they've got some of our delegations as
Yeah.
sponsors, so.
I was noticing that.
that's where we're somewhat tentative about decisions too. So the next thing that we want to talk about is semiconductors. They're getting so much attention this session, and we want to just address Senate Bill 4. So Sarah, would you mind helping people contextualize this piece over all of them?
Best I can. So what's been happening this session, which has been a little bit more interesting, is all of the bills really tied to our economic development programs, everything from enterprise zones to funding for industrial site readiness and things of that nature, have all been sort of floating. There's about 30 to 40 of those different bills that are out there. Normally we get 2 or 3. But they've all been floating under this preference of, hey, there's going to be these semiconductor package bills that are going forward. What the legislature appears to be doing is sort of a twofold approach. So they're creating a semiconductor package to support businesses that want to apply for the federal CHIPS dollars. And so they kind of can go through this package and to show how supportive Oregon is to semiconductors. So that's one arm of it. But the other arm is they are creating loans, grants, opportunities for the state to be able to be more competitive in the semiconductor manufacturing sort of field. So there's sort of these two things that are happening at the same time. So what Senate Bill 4 is technically is it's sort of that first kind of base bill that's building the grants and loan program that would assist those businesses that are saying, hey, we want to compete for these CHIPS dollars. Oregon is great. It also has a land use component, and it spells out several communities that would be a focus to have land brought in from the governor into the UGB that's currently not in the UGB. So it would give her executive authority right now. Well, there's a bunch of amendments that they've talked about, but right now it'd be through like December of 2024. So there's sort of these two things at play right now. It's still really early. The work sessions are still happening twice a week. They're getting hearings. The committee members are pretty much saying this is sort of a base. What they're looking, I think, to do is incorporate all of the programs that Oregon already has that are getting ready to sunset somehow into this, instead of having these 50 or 60 bills to kind of build a bigger package. This particular bill is written with an emergency clause. So most of our programs that we're used to using are based with property taxes. And so you can't have a program that's funded with property taxes in a bill with an emergency clause. So that's sort of floating out there. Like, how do they do that exactly? Which seems to be part of the conversation. They're still looking to create new programs as part of this. All of this to say there's a lot still happening and it's really early, but I just felt kind of remiss to not bring it to your attention, to one, let you know that we're watching it, we're tracking it, we're trying to see how do all these things get integrated so that the programs that Salem uses, number one, continue to be available, those sunsets get extended, but at the same time, what are these new packages that are being brought in? How could those help us? You know, how are things moving and shaking? And so that's kind of what's happening with this one, but it's, I don't know when they're gonna have that final sort of first package ready to go. It does sound like they've asked for, and I know a couple weeks ago, they'd asked for land information. I don't know what that is.
It's wrong. And
I swear it's not me. I know that they'd reached out to communities asking about land that was available for industrial use within the UGB. My understanding is they haven't fully asked about outside of the UGB, but then in a totally separate bill, Chair Bynum brought up that she's waiting on sort of this industrial lands analysis for both Senate Bill 4 and a bunch of the other things that they're working on to figure out exactly how much land is in there. Is land people are saying is available truly available, i.e. Is it a wetland that you're saying it's available, but we can really never develop on it? They're trying to figure that out, and they're also seem to be really interested in the true cost. How much money do they really need to put into these programs? Because they're thinking what maybe people are talking about is not enough, which is great. I mean, realistically, for us, but there's a lot of moving pieces, kind of to say. So it's just one of those where I just kind of thought, when I brought it up to Courtney, it really hadn't started making it in the news, and within like 2 days, it started getting kind of all over the place. So it's just wanted to let you all know it's what we're seeing, what's happening.
What are the implications of bringing land into the UGB for the city? Are we obligated to take services to them? I mean, is
I
that?
believe so, yeah.
So that-
I mean, there could be some funds, but that's, I know from Eunice's perspective and planning, that's obviously not something that they're in favor of. The bill lists communities, but it's not exclusive to those communities. It just says that it will give focus to these particular areas. I know Wilsonville has actually testified that they would like to be taken off that list. And if the governor tries to do it, they're basically going to say no.
Are we on the list?
We are not.
I didn't think we were.
No, we're not on the list, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't be
Added, yeah. Or
if she finds.
subject to-
Exactly. Now, one of the amendments that they're trying to put in there right now is that in order for the governor to do that, she first has to show that there is not land within that particular community's UGB to fill this particular need. So there's a little justification there. And then it has to be, I believe, within a 3-mile radius of the current UGB boundaries. There has to be a public hearing as part of it. So there are some steps, but it does take local control away. If the land does not get developed, I believe within a 12-month time span, or the development doesn't start, it could be brought back in or reversed so that it's not within the UGB anymore. So there's some of that. You know, I don't know if this is anything that we would really, it's moving somehow, and there's a lot of push. I mean, someone from the governor's staff seems to be at every hearing to testify and answer questions, it appears. So I'm not sure where it's all going and how. In general, most communities are all, and organizations are supportive of the funding and the programming and all that. The land use piece is where they're getting a lot of pushback, especially in Hillsborough, because there was an agreement. They brought land into the UGB and they said they wouldn't do it for 15 years and it's only been 5. So a lot of the farmers from that area are starting to really push back. So how this plays out, I don't know, but that's sort of what I'm seeing. But they're meeting on Mondays and Wednesdays, so I'm trying to keep tabs.
And it's getting a lot of attention. So we just wanted you to be aware that we're watching it. There's a lot still at play and we don't know how it will end.
And all the big players are actively involved, you know, all the organizations that we rely on to kind of, you know, participate and whatnot, you know, are all in there. The league is participating and economic development is participating and communities. And so there's a lot of folks that are kind of in there. And there's been this task force that's been together for a year. And so you've got a lot of those members that are coming forward and talking about what the task force was talking about to the committee. And so
And none of this is guaranteed. So like every state's probably doing their due diligence, trying to get these dollars.
Right.
But none of it's guaranteed. Does
Exactly.
Oregon have a history because of Intel that
and nothing
might be better than other
is guaranteed. And one of the amendments that they said is supposedly coming out is the way that the bill's kind of written is, okay, Oregon, we're going to have these grants and loans and you can use that to kind of help get these bigger federal dollars. But if you're not successful in getting those bigger federal dollars, you can still get the Oregon dollars, because the way that I guess it's written right now, that isn't a gimme. So if you don't get the federal, you wouldn't get the Oregon. So that's one thing that they're trying to work out, is that you would still get the Oregon dollars, even if you don't get the federal dollars. But what it appears they're trying to do is, one, find a way to maintain everything that we have, because that's sort of the baseline of what Oregon can provide to be competitive. And then what can we do in addition to, so we can compete with all the other states that are out there? And that's what they're trying to sort of figure out through this bill. And I think through the other 45 to 60 bills that we're tracking of all these different programs and how they could get extended and to what years and things like that, because it's kind of this big mismatch of people trying to do the same thing. And I think this committee is going to figure it out, but it's going to take some time. And they do seem to be asking really, really good questions and asking for really good data. So I'm hopeful we'll see some really interesting things come out of them right now.
All right, thank you.
Tell me, tell me again, you mentioned briefly the property tax implications. If this land is brought into Salem's UGB, would they be subject to property taxes?
They would already, if they're within the city, they would still be paying property taxes. It's just the UGB means that we'd have to provide services. Don't they pay property taxes? inside?
Well, no, if they're inside the UGB, but outside the city, they don't pay taxes to the city, you know.
But if they're within the city,
If they're within the
We
city,
have
but if
to-
they're within the city, they're in the UGB.
So if the governor manually adds them to
yes.
within the UGB, then they would be subject to property taxes.
No, we need to annex too. We would have to also annex,
Okay. Okay, thank
take
you.
the step of annexing. To bring them into the incorporated
I
part.
guess my follow-up question is, if they were inside the city limits at the end of it, is this like proposing that they waive like SDCs or?
That's a whole different conversation. They're gonna waive all our SPCs.
Councilor Lennox, the UGB is this area, right, but this part is not incorporated
Okay.
into the city, so that it would be another. It would just be expanding this outer boundary,
Mhm.
but not bringing them into the city.
Okay, yeah, because I'm just trying to understand, what are the financial costs to us if the governor decides to add these inside our UGB? That's what I'm ultimately trying to figure out.
It's providing services to.
Which a lot of times SDCs do
So
could
Sarah,
require.
if I understand this, what they're looking for is of a scale that's outside what would be available in our area.
I believe so, yes,
Have any land.
They're looking for hundreds of acres, not
correct.
20 acres.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
Uh,
Thank you.
Turner could, or some place like that might be.
Yeah, and I think for the federal piece, definitely, the committee does sound like one of the things they are looking at though is for. And I think that's where they're waiting to kind of get this report on what everybody has, because there are some areas where you have a good amount of land, but it's not enough to cite, something like this. And so they are talking about a lot of workforce kind of things. And, where can we set up sort of these educational workforce to get the employees to then get them out? And where do we have maybe sites that would make more sense for things of that nature? So they are trying to look more globally at kind of like, yes, we want the big chip manufacturers, but there's other pieces that would fall into that. And maybe there's a way that in some communities they could get that, where other communities maybe get the larger chips. So there's sort of the R&D piece, there's the workforce piece, there's kind of these bigger incentives, and then there's the land use. And that seems to be how they've broken out what they're trying to piece together right now. In a very complicated way.
Yeah, can you tell me what the list, you were saying there are some
Oh, yeah.
cities that are listed, what are the cities she's thinking about?
I will tell you right now. It is, so the way they have it written, it says, in designating sites under this section, the governor shall give consideration to the cities of Albany, Boardman, Corvallis, Gresham, Happy Valley, Hillsborough, McMinnville, Medford, Newport, North Plains, Redmond, Scappoose, Sherwood, the Dalles, Tualatin, and Wilsonville.
So Albany and McMinnville, I mean, even though not us, that can certainly have some sort of downstream impacts, people moving here to take advantage of urban semiconductors.
But again, it's not an exclusive list.
Yeah,
Right,
So-
so just a minimum, that's the minimum list.
Right.
I understand that.
Yeah,
So
so,
And we could be at it,
We're watching,
a lot
yes.
could happen.
We're tracking, we're watching, we'll keep everybody updated. It's just, it's getting high profile, and I think it's gonna get more and more high profile, especially with the land use piece. Obviously, you've got that kind of fight that's already been happening. And then, the whole push for money, obviously semiconductors are going to other states. It's been all over the news. And so I think this particular bill at a high level is going to keep hitting the media circuit at a minimum. And I just kind of wanted to make sure we were updating you guys.
Thank you so much.
I have a couple core questions. Has Albany McMinnville testified in support, in opposition? Have you heard what they feel
I
about it?
don't remember off the top of my head. I track, but they are not ones that are hitting the top of my mind that they've been for or against. I think Albany has said that they're for, a lot of communities have said they're for the concept. That's been the big thing. Wilsonville is the only one I know for certain that has come out and said they do not want to be on this list and they do not want to be considered. Very specifically, but a lot of the testimony and the letters have been more of, we're in support of the overall concept, or we're really opposed to the land use component, so far.
Thank you.
I wanted to chat for just very briefly about meeting logistics. I know we have to run because some of us have to get to another place. But our next meeting is scheduled for the 17th. And that's the deadline day.
Right,
Would there be, is that list coming out? The deadline, we wouldn't know until the end of the day.
right.
Yeah.
So I have my challenge for that day is funeral at 11 o'clock.
Our intent was to get a report to you about the bills that were still thriving on that day, but we didn't feel a need to conduct a meeting. Because that day, yes, we do, but I was proposing at the bottom of the agenda to take just a report to you.
Oh, okay.
Only because that day we won't know until the end of the day,
So we're gonna cancel our March 17th meeting.
if that's okay with the committee.
It definitely is okay with me.
Plus I'm having knee surgery
And you already surgery.
a couple days before, so.
Okay,
Our needs are insignificant.
That's right.
so we will.
That's what really matters.
So you watch for a report, you'll know how we need notice of it.
Exactly, we would prefer to send it.
Okay.
Because we won't know until the end of the day. So the next meeting would be March 31st. If you wish, we could look at the other date, which would have been 24th. If you want, we could hold a meeting on the 24th. It's your prerogative.
If it's. It might be helpful. I would say everybody just hold that on your calendar just in case. But we'll wait to see what happens.
Thanks for those changes. That sounds good.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to just notice quickly is the packet construction and whether it's of use for you to get those 3 different kinds of reports. So one that is focused on the bills for today, brought to conversation in the meeting, one that is a complete watch list, things that we've already talked about and you've asked us to continue to watch. And then the last one is those things that have been approved by the council for our position statements.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay,
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's, it's keeping track of the things we've already said we're supportive. It's really helpful. I don't have a photographic memory, so yes, it's very helpful.
okay, great. Thank you.